Got it.
Amazing. So hello to everyone. I'm Sofia Freudenstein. I'm the ASBI or Maharat intern. And we've been doing this Parsha class since the beginning of Parsha Breshit a few months ago, where we have been looking at the Parsha through the lens of a passage in the Talmud and kind of using that as a kind of commentary to understand our Torah text for the Parsha better. I think that we've explored some really interesting ways to do it. We've seen sometimes literary parallels, sometimes we've seen like a whole new halachic or legal dimension that we probably wouldn't have picked up on our own. Even though we did not meet for the past few weeks, I did keep track in the Parsha. I sent out an email, and if you didn't get it, I'm happy to forward it to you as well. You can private message me or email if you're curious. I felt like for myself, in order to keep the practice going, I wanted to make sure that even when we weren't meeting, that there was always a Talmudic passage to go along with the Parsha. And it's still fruitful for me so far. I still feel like I learned something new every single time. So we're in the last Parsha of the book of Breshit. We're in Parsha Vayechi. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting what we're going to be doing today. I saw, oh yes, Audrey's here. We have some pictures of some ancient Near Eastern things we're going to talk about, all the way back to when we talked about the Tower of Babel a few months ago. So I'm excited to see where we're going to go with this today. And here is the source sheet. Okay, so everyone can take a look. I'll also share screens so that we can all follow along together. And for people who are new to the class, the way we usually do this is the source sheet is broken up into first the Torah passage from this week's Parsha that we want to focus on, then the Gemara passage, and then we're going to try and synthesize the two and think about what can we learn from these things. And we're going to be reading it, but then also this is a group where we love hearing discussion, what people have to say. So if you have a question or a thought that you want to share, feel free to raise your hand, and let's get to it. Okay. Let me find the actual Google Doc. For some reason I don't see it when I share. That's unusual. Screen options. The screen. Okay, if you see that, what do you see? Do you see my email? Or the Parsha class? That's really the goal. Is everyone there? Can they see?
Oh yeah, Parsha class now. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, great. Awesome. So Vayechi. Vayechi is about the death of Jacob. We've been going through the patriarchs, and he's going to be passing away. The brothers have seemingly begun to reconcile. Joseph has revealed himself to them, and they realize that they made a mistake selling him into slavery many years ago. And Jacob and Joseph get to meet again, but it's close to the end of Jacob's life. He's very old, and he passes away. There's an amazing song that you can see that he sings to each of the brothers, and it's going to be kind of like a foreshadow of what those tribes who come from those brothers look like. There's a lot of fantastical things happening there. The song that I was playing at the beginning of the Zoom, Hamalach Hagoel Oti, that an angel was guarding me, is what Yaakov says to his children, and we sing it now like on Simchat Torah morning every single year to children. It's a really nice, sweet kind of lullaby. And I find that for me, I think, oh, well, Yaakov died. That's the end of the story. It's time to get to Sefer Shemot. We have to hear about how Bnei Israel are slaves in Egypt. And we kind of skip over this last chapter, chapter 50. This is like a lot of nitty gritty about how Yaakov passes away. He actually gets mummified, right? Because they're in the land of Egypt, and they go through these details about what the mummification process looks like, which is kind of weird. But then there's a part that I find, like when I think about, let's say, Joseph the Technicolor Dreamcoat, the musical, this part is not shown in the musical. It doesn't work as well because we think that the reconciliation between the brothers has happened, and actually it's still a little bit more fraught. So that's what I want to look at today. For myself, I always surprise myself. This is like in the text. It's not a midrash. It's not something external, but it's not usually part of the story that we tell. So I'm hoping that we're going to do that. Then we'll see some Gemara that talks about a different light, and we'll go from there. So this is the Tanakh source. We're in Genesis chapter 50, starting at verse 10. Vayavo ad goren ha'atad asher be'ever hayarden v'yispadu sham misped gadol v'chaved me'od v'yas laviv evel shivat yamim. So all the brothers come to Goren Ha'atad, which we're going to understand here, even though the English says this, Goren Ha'atad. Goren is a threshing floor. So it's the threshing floor of someone named Atad, and it was beyond the Jordan River. And everyone went there and they mourned. a very great mourning. It was very intense, and they made it for their father Yaakov, and it lasted for 7 days, similar to how we do Shiva today. Vayar Yoshev haaretz ha'kanani et ha'evel b'goren ha'atad vayomru evel kaved zel Mitzrayim al kain karashima avel Mitzrayim asher be'ever ha'yadain. So everyone, all the Canaanites that were looking around, they go, wow, these Egyptians, right? Because it was Yosef, and he was the viceroy of Egypt at this point. The brothers had been in Egypt because of the famine. So the Canaanites look and say, oh, there's a group of Egyptians here, and they seem to really care about this person. And they actually renamed the place the Great Mourning of Egypt because it was so intense. Okay, next verse. We're on verse 12. And the sons did just as they were told to. And what is that? Vayisu oto vanav arza kanan veikru oto b'marat ste hamachpelah asher kana Abraham et asadeh la'achuzat kever me'it Ephron hachiti al panei mamrei. So they do just what their father asked. What exactly did their father ask them? It was that even though he passed away in Egypt, he was mummified in Egypt, he wanted to be buried back in the land of Israel, the land of Canaan, just like his forefathers. A few months ago at this point, we talked about Abraham buying the field of Ephron for his wife Sarah's burial plot. So he wants to go all the way there to the cave of Machpelah and join the rest of his family there. And so he asked for his family to be doing something that is respectful to the dead, which is an important concept when it comes to mourning practices in Judaism today, to respect the wishes of the person who passed away, where they want to be buried. Okay, so he gets buried there. Vayashuv Yosef Mitzrayima hu ve'achav v'chol ha'olim ito likbor et aviv achrei kavro et aviv. So they say, great, like we went to this threshing floor, and then they all returned back to Egypt, everyone who had gone to bury their father. Vayiru achei Yosef ki met avihem vayomru lu yistemenu Yosef v'hashev yashiv lanu et kol hara asher gamalnu oto. But the brothers are scared. The brothers say, okay, well, our father is dead now. Now there's no reason for Yosef to not be mad at us and want to take revenge after we sent him all the way to the pit many years ago. Now that our father is dead, he's going to not want to be this goody two-shoes anymore, and he's going to want to do bad to us, and we're scared of what he's going to do. And then Yosef says, no. Our father commanded me the following. Ki tamru Yosef, ana sana pesha achecha v'chatatam ki ra'a gimalucha, v'ata sana lefesha avdei Elohei avicha, vayif Yosef kidabram elav. So shall you say to Joseph, forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father's house. And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. So the brothers one good question, is this like based off of something real that Yaakov had told him, or are they kind of making up this excuse? They say, well, our father before he died said, Yosef, don't get too angry. Make sure that we're going to be safe even after I pass away. And when Yosef hears this, he's in tears because it's very emotional. They actually bowed down to Joseph. Please, we will be your servants. Do not be your slaves even, which is interesting foreshadowing what's to come next with Bnei Israel. Please don't do any wrong to us. Yosef says, please do not be scared, for am I God? I would never inflict punishment like this. Or who am I to know who is right? And he says, you all intended to do bad things by sending me away, but ultimately God had a plan, because look, there's so many of us now. We all got to survive the famine and ended up here. And then he says, and so do not be afraid. I will sustain you. Remember, he's the viceroy of Egypt. He has the ability to do that. And I will make sure that you are okay. And he reassured them, and then he spoke kindly to them. So there's a lot of interesting emotions here in this story. Back in Parsha Vayigash, last week's Parsha, we saw a lot of emotion where Yosef and the brothers are confronting. Yosef is crying. He can't even look them in the face. And something like that almost happens here when the brothers are begging him to treat them kindly. He's crying, and it's unclear maybe like where the crying is coming from. Is it because he's so horrified that his brothers would even think he would do something so bad? Is it because he feels conflicted himself? A lot of emotions going on. But I think this is a really interesting interaction. First, there's this whole discussion about the threshing floor, that it happens there and it's big enough that even the non-Jews in the surrounding area see what's going on and they say, whoa, we have to name this place after the great mourning that is happening here. And then there's this confrontation that it's true that they returned to Egypt where this confrontation happened, but it seems to have been spurred off of what was happening there, where the brothers are super concerned about what Yosef is going to do to them. And then it turns out to be fine. But it's not the same kind of like fairy tale ending to the Joseph story that I think we're used to. One could maybe like wonder if that's actually more realistic to what resolution and closure looks like. It's never like a one-time experience. It's usually a lot of reassurance, building that trust again. And I think it's really interesting that that's how we basically end the story. Like after this, we hear a little bit more about Yosef's descendants and how he got to meet his great-grandchildren. But otherwise, the book is then over. And then we move on to Sefer Shemot. So I think there's a lot of interesting questions that we could ask here. And I'm hoping that when we see the Gemara, some of these ideas will come up. But before we do that, I'm curious if anyone else has anything that they noticed or questions they want to bring up from the text. Feel free to raise your hand on the Zoom screen or with your camera, and we'll get to it. Yeah, Barry, nice to see you.
Hi, welcome back. It's great to have this class again. Yeah, I see a parallel here between Yosef's brothers, I think, learned the lesson of Uncle Esau, that Esau was itching to get his revenge on his brother Yaakov, who stole the birthright, got the blessing, and just waiting for his father to die. And so I think there's family precedent here about bad blood between conflicting brothers. When the father passes away, how to deal with it. So I think the brothers had a concern back then. They saw the lesson in their own family. I think Yosef is more credible in his statement that when he assures the boys not once but twice, he assures them here and he assures them earlier that don't be that upset about the sale anymore, about selling Yosef. That this was God's plan. That God had a place for this, and this is how it shook out. I get more and more comfortable with that concept every year I read this story and I read commentary, that this is the case. So I'm good with this, but also it's noteworthy that, not to be a spoiler alert, but at the end of this Parsha, Yosef himself passes away. So we lose two tzaddikim there. And Yosef makes his prediction, Pakod, or however it's written, that there will come a special time. Yosef has his foresight, that they will leave, and that he has his brother swear to take him with. So I see all these things going on, that there's family interplay here, and interestingly enough, you mentioned the foretelling, the possible giveaway that there'll come a slavery, and there'll when Yosef when the boys offer to go into slavery, and Yosef says, no thanks, I'm not God, I'm not substitute of God, and he assures them. I think they can buy his story, and why they're reluctant to do it, I'm not really sure, but it does foretell to me the later division between the dominion of Israel and the dominion of Yehuda. And interestingly enough, Yehuda is the guy who champions the family before Yosef in terms of not bringing Binyamin if he doesn't have to, and not enslaving Binyamin when the chalice is found in Binyamin's saddlebag. So there's a lot of stuff going on in this parsha. It's beautiful.
Lots of things.
Amazing.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Lots of levels.
So, okay, I got that off my chest. Thanks.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like we could think, okay, maybe they were overreacting, but right there's family precedent for
Absolutely.
there being real strife, and I think actually that's good for us to hold on to when we see the Gemara source in particular. Is not just family strife, but there's often only one sibling that wins out in the end, and that's what we're gonna hopefully see coming up a little bit more, maybe where some of that fear comes from.
One quick comment, and I will make this very brief. You mentioned the cave at Machpelah. for Yaakov wanted to be buried in his land with his forefathers. And there is commentary, I believe it's Rashi, but I know I read commentary in this parsha about Yaakov being concerned that Esav would want to make a claim. And Yaakov wanted to make sure with Esav that this was Yaakov's right to do, that Yaakov had paid the price here somewhere along the way, in some kind of description of some kind of deeds or whatnot, or Esav failed to buy into the 400 years that Bnei Israel would have to endure before the promised land. That Esav took his possessions, he took his har seir and off he went, and he didn't want to be a part of that travail. So Yaakov is concerned that Esav wants to make a claim, but Yaakov overcomes that claim somehow or another too. So there's a lot of drama in this whole thing.
Lots of drama, lots of family drama. Does anyone else want to share any thoughts before we move on? Okay. Feel free, if things come up, you're welcome to jump in. So we saw a lot of family drama. That's, I think, what we've seen here. And this question of like, who wins out in the end? And I think that this Gemara that we're going to see now addresses some of these things. So we're going to go to a Gemara in Masechet Sota, which is an interesting place for us to go because some people might be familiar with the term. The Sota is referring to the Sota woman. And this is based off of the ritual in which when there's a concern that a woman is being adulterous, there was almost like this potion, magical potion, that she would drink in front of a Beit Din, and if her body sagged and like magically deformed, that was proof that she had been adulterous, and if not, then she was able to survive and be, even with all the rumors, like be seen not as someone who committed adultery, which obviously is a great offense within Jewish practice. And yet there's these amazing stories randomly, like in the middle of Masechet Sota, all these amazing agadatot, all of these fascinating stories about Miriam, about Hannah, lots of women, which is interesting. Maybe, I guess, because they're talking about women, but this is a more redeeming way to talk about women. And there's a lot about the Joseph story. And so that's what we're going to be looking at here. And I think that this might provide a very different idea of what exactly was going on, specifically in the threshing floor, that then set up the interaction that Yosef and the brothers had later on. I'll read in English for the sake of simplicity. So the Gemara explains what honor was accorded to the family of Jacob. As it is written, and they came to the threshing floor of Atad, which is beyond the Jordan, and there they wailed with very great and sore wailing, and he made a mourning for his father 7 days. So taking the first verse that we started with, the question of, okay, we're going to learn a little bit more about the great things that were for Jacob's family. And we start off with this line about the threshing floor. Okay. The word Atad, remember we said it was like the name of someone, Atad, it was Atad's threshing floor. But we're going to learn a little bit more about the etymology of the term. The word Atad is the name of the box thorn bush. That's a random bush that's a little bit spiky. That's like probably the most helpful point here for what's about to come next. But that's the imagery that's there, is that it is a threshing floor, but there's a lot of other like sharp things on it. And does a boxthorn bush have a threshing floor? And they go, well, what would be the point? A boxthorn bush doesn't really produce any fruit or any kind of produce. Like, why would you need to have a threshing floor nearby? Thorns are not collected to be eaten, as I was saying. Rabbi Abahu says, this teaches that they surrounded the casket of Jacob with crowns, like this threshing floor that is surrounded with box thorns. Because the children of Esau and the children of Ishmael and the children of Keturah all came to the burial of Jacob. So they said, well, this is why it's described this way. Imagine that the casket where Yaakov is buried was surrounded by crowns, just like this threshing floor is surrounded by these bushes that are thorny. And what was happening there? There were not just Yaakov's direct family, but the children of Esau, the children of Ishmael, the children of Keturah, who's Keturah? Keturah is Abraham's like surprise other wife after Sarah dies, and the descendants through her. Say it again.
Could be Hagar. Could be a name.
Yes, that's also there's a midrash that in the end, even though Abraham sent away Hagar, that this was who he remarried, which is also a very interesting idea, like what exactly was going on in that dynamic. They all came to bury Jacob. A sage taught, initially they all came to wage war with the family of Jacob. But once they saw the crown of Joseph, the viceroy of Egypt, hanging on the casket of Jacob, they all took their crowns and hung them on the casket of Jacob. A sage taught, 36 crowns were hung on the casket of Jacob. This was the great honor according to the family of Jacob. So not only was there this image of the casket and then the crowns surrounding it, there's a story to the crowns. The crowns represent the different families, because the idea is that even though ultimately we are descended from Jacob, that if you were part of the Abrahamic faith, you were chosen to be like as some kind of representative of God on earth. And so you're almost like royalty here, that you would have these crowns. And what's I think so fascinating about this, and this matches, like we were saying, the previous generations of turmoil, like with Esau maybe confronting Jacob and it being war, that they were all coming to be ready to wage war. And then the moment that they saw Joseph put his crown on Jacob, right, that seems to be like maybe a sense of humility, like Joseph is the viceroy of Egypt and he's taking his crown and putting on his father's casket. That's seen as such a great sign of respect that everyone else says, okay, I guess we also are going to do this as well. And then all of the crowns surround his casket. And then this idea that there were 36 is a great typological number, a number that comes up often. It's double chai, right? Because the gematria for chai is 18. So that seems to be a good special number. That's the amazing honor that was given to Yaakov's family. So to trace where this came from, it seems that the rabbis think, why do we need to care about this threshing floor? We need to do something about it. And it could be the name of a person, but often the names of people symbolize things in any great piece of literature. And then, of course, also the Tanakh. And so it must be that it was actually talking about this weird plant that was also on the threshing floor, and the weird juxtaposition of having a plant that it was not edible surrounding the threshing floor, which is made to make food edible. And that's actually representative of what it looked like to have the crown surrounding Jacob's casket. So I think just like the previous text, there's a lot here. Does anyone have any thoughts, questions, reactions to what's going on here? Has anyone seen the threshing floor before also? Like that would be some great help if anyone's like done any agricultural work. No. I'd never seen threshing happen in real time until this past summer. And I didn't really know the difference between like threshing and winnowing, but like there's a real difference. Like you like smack the wheat and then you have to blow off I think it's called the chaff on the wheat. So there's a lot there that I wish I was more knowledgeable at. I'm sure the rabbis of the Gemara were because they were most likely being farmers also. But yeah, any thoughts?
I have one.
Does anyone else want to share before Barry?
I'm good with that. Anybody else?
Okay, Barry, feel free to start us off. And if other people have thoughts, feel free to raise your hand.
A quick one. Actually, maybe two, but I'll make it quick. 36 crowns. Well, the word crowns jumps out at me because later on, we see crowns. Well, we've seen crowns, haven't we? But we see crowns certainly in Shemot, and maybe later. No, it's later. We see crowns associated with various things of merit, profundity, righteousness, positivity. There's 10 crowns for this person or these people, whatnot. We see the word crowns is a term of honor in Torah here. So these 36 crowns seem to be. These were people. These were, I guess, groups, nations, certain communities that had their leaders had honor, and therefore the crowns, and then later on crowns of this and crowns of that, in the building of the Mishkan and whatnot. So this is a forerunner of this is honor. This is. People come with a thought that you mentioned about maybe they come to war with each other, and all of a sudden they are confronted with a situation that seems better to be honored than fought over. So crowns are a positive thing here. It turns people and it merits people.
Yes, I think also then even more so that then Joseph, who like might be the most like technically worthy to have it, he puts it down also. I think that's great imagery.
Yeah, there's a midrash about
Marilyn,
Joseph.
go for it.
Yeah, there's a midrash about Joseph being the reason why the Yam Suf parted too. I'll let it go there.
Marilyn, did you want to share something?
Yes. If I remember correctly, box thorns are invasive species that tend to choke out other vegetation. And I was thinking of them being like barbed wire, that people would put the threshing floor where there's box thorns, so it'd make it harder for other people and for animals to get at the produce.
Wow. Oh, that's fascinating. Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And the imagery then is like so powerful, because the threshing floor is the total opposite of that, right? It's made for produce. And then to have these box thorns that like are invasive species kind of surrounding it, is it to protect, or is it to like block it in? That's really interesting. And I'm definitely not a botanist and agriculturalist, but I wonder if the imagery there, and part of what this is struggling with, is like this idea of we're trying to figure out what chosenness means here, right? Like this is the question, I guess, for the Jewish people, that we are a chosen people, but all of and what that means obviously is like that could be a whole class in and of itself. But I think that struggling with like who are Abraham's descendants, and who gets chosen or not chosen, right? That Esav was supposed to get the birthright and Jacob takes it. Yosef becomes this viceroy of Egypt, and he has these amazing dreams and the coat, and then the jealousy that comes with the brothers. There's a lot of struggle there, and trying to figure out like who should win out, and what's the best way to propagate the community. I wonder if that imagery then also of like this plant in particular, and the rest of it is kind of showing that struggle of like, when are we focusing on growth and what it means for things to grow, but some things maybe can't grow. I wonder if it's struggling with that. So thank you. That's a great addition.
Sure is. Thanks, man.
Anyone else want to share that hasn't yet? Otherwise, we'll move on.
Go, girl, go.
Awesome. Okay, let's go for it. So I think both Barry and Marilyn have mentioned things that are really going to get us to where we want to go. I want to talk a bit about threshing floors because, as I said, these are like technical things that, like, if you're in agriculture, you need it, but in order to have food to have produce for. But there's also something very interesting about what threshing floors meant in an ancient Near Eastern context. So here I have, there's lots of Christian academics that like love trying to figure out in the Old Testament for them, like what was the symbolism going on here. So there was someone who wrote a whole PhD thesis on the nature of threshing floors. I did not put it all here for you, but I put one paragraph that could be interesting. So Dr. Victor Matthews, he says, in entranceways and threshing floors, legally significant sites in the ancient Near East, he says, it should be noted that the gate was not the only place associated with the judgment in the ancient Near East. The threshing floor, Goren, a center of economic and social life, is also occasionally mentioned as a site of judicial proceedings. The smaller villages would generally not be protected by the massive walls and elaborate gate complexes of the larger urban centers. As a result, the focus of much of their activity, both economic and legal, would have been centered on the threshing floor. Since it was an open circular area filled with community activity, it could have easily served as a meeting place and judicial arena. And to really go with that, and Audrey, this one's for you. I got a picture already in advance of what the threshing floor would have looked like.
Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. This is a great one. It's very interesting to me, like sociologically, like Jewish people don't love making the picture so much, but all the Christian Bible websites were ready to go to show you what it looked like. But this would have been a typical threshing floor. You can see like how it's a circle, and you can imagine that if you're in like a small city, like Dr. Victor Matthews was saying, like that this would be a great place to meet. And I think what's interesting here then, in light of Marilyn's point, is look how open and bare it is. And then imagine that if you had all these like scary thorn bushes all around, like it totally changes the nature of what this threshing floor would have been and like what is protecting it. It's like beautiful that it's open, but also maybe you do want to make sure that it's somewhat secluded and you can be able to have difficult judicial discussions happening on that threshing floor. So I think that's like a really interesting anecdote, that the threshing floor isn't just useful for produce, but also seems to be a place of meeting. You might recognize the other time threshing floors are important in Tanakh. I brought the story from the book of Ruth.
Yeah.
In Ruth, she is a woman who is married to Naomi's son, who passes away. And Naomi and her are really the only living relatives in their immediate family. And it's really hard to be two women doing that in this ancient Near Eastern context. So they look for the closest relative to take them in, and it's Boaz. And Boaz is very kind to them, gives them amazing like food, and they're able to go to his field. And Naomi says, okay, Ruth, you really got to go push to Boaz to marry him. He's going to be able to take care of us. And the way that she does it is that she approaches him at the threshing floor, which is a pretty intense and like somewhat intimate scene, as we'll see. But I wonder if with our new understanding of threshing floors, we can understand why it was happening there. I'll read the English for simplicity's sake. Now there's our kinsman Boaz. This is Naomi's instructions to Ruth what to do, whose girls you were close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you are to do. So Naomi gives her a mission. She has to go, be happy with Boaz, kind of get him on the softer side after some food and drink, and to approach him at the threshing floor. It seems like it was a convenient place to sleep out in the open at night. And in a time period that was, I guess, a little bit more prude, uncovering one's feet was a very intimate act. And she's told to go do that. And so we could think, well, maybe it's at a threshing floor because it's convenient. They're in the middle of the barley harvest right now. But based off of the knowledge that we just got of what exactly the threshing floors are, there might be something deeply powerful about her going there in that moment. It changes the whole nature of that encounter. It's not just, oh, we need someone to support us, but it's actually like it almost becomes something legal. That it's important that this establishes a care for each other in a legal sense. And I think that it's no coincidence then that it's at the threshing floor. There are other examples too throughout Tanakh. I didn't want to put too many on here because that would get us too distracted. But within the book of Samuel and the book of Kings, there are times where there's judgment that needs to happen, and either happens at the gate of the city, like they were saying, or it happens on the threshing floor. It also happens like at the end of the second book of Samuel. There's this discussion about where the temple is going to be, and that happens at a threshing floor, and that seems to be an important space of judgment. And then in the book of Kings, there's a discussion about false prophets that happens at the gates, and then also the threshing floors. So I think what this comes to do is this makes us wonder, so what exactly needed to be almost like on a legal standpoint evaluated in our story all the way back in Parsha Vayechi with the mourning of Jacob, and the story we have in Sota about all of the relatives coming together to mourn. And that's what the last source is going to do for us here. So this is from Rabbi Tali Adler. She's also a graduate of Yeshivat Maharat. And this is what she says. These verses, so often overlooked, as I said, who even reads chapter 50 of Bereshit anyway, should actually be read as a surprise ending. Before this moment, only Yosef had been explicitly informed of a promise of redemption and return to the land, much less promised to share. In informing his brothers that they too will be redeemed, Yosef is actually sharing a blessing that had been previously granted to him and his family alone. In an unprecedented move, where previous patriarchs chose their sons, Yosef chooses his brothers. After generations of struggle between brothers for the covenantal blessing, Yosef chooses to end the cycle of chosen and unchosen sons. In choosing his brothers, Yosef makes the move that transforms Abraham's line from a family which much continuously pruned itself, removing the unchosen elements into a blessed nation. So to tie everything back together here, the brothers were very scared, as we saw, that Yosef was going to turn them into, not treat them well, so much so that they were willing to say, we will be your slaves. And Yosef is so horrified. But as we said, that's somewhat precedented. We've seen how troublesome the relationships between brothers have been throughout the generations up until now. But what Rabbi Tali Adler points out is that Yosef does something that's incredibly powerful. Technically, only Yaakov blessed him to say, okay, you can be in charge of everyone. You can be the chosen one of my line. And it's a little bit sad because you think that that Yaakov would have learned at this point how painful favoritism could have been. But what Yosef does is that he decides to transform that and say, actually, I don't want this just for myself. What's going to be able to solve all of this is that actually we get rid of this idea of favoritism between the brothers, and actually all of us should be the favorites, the chosen. And that also works really great from like a narrative arc of Bereshit. Like, why do we end here? Like, they're about to go into Egypt. Why not just continue? But it's that something actually stops, right? All of the struggle of chosenness within the Abrahamic line stops with Yosef because he says, we're not doing this anymore. It's been too dangerous. It's been sad. It's torn families apart. And I don't want it anymore. And then when you think about if that's the message that Yosef gives, based off of it being on a threshing floor, which is what we just said is a space of judgment. And not only that, but we have the story from Masechet Sota that we saw, where it's clear in the story, they're struggling like who is going to be chosen. Esau's children show up, Keturah's children show up, Ishmael's children show up. It seems to all tie together to say that it wasn't really just about burying Jacob on a threshing floor and everyone could see them in a threshing floor, but it was an opportunity to perform for everyone's sake and show that we're not doing this favoritism thing anymore. We're actually all a part of this together. And that's actually the only way that we can continue forward. And to use Marilyn's amazing knowledge of what the bush was, then Rabbi Tali Adler's line at the end is like even more poignant about the pruning, right? That we don't want anything that's not going to be able to propagate anymore. We want something that can grow into what a nation should become. And that's actually the foundation that we can set in order to become a nation, not just a group of families. And that's then how the rest of Reishi kind of ties up together, that then we're ready to go for Shmot. So I think it's a really cool read that I would not have gotten necessarily right away from the text. And I never really thought about threshing floors so much. But I think thinking about it in this way of being a locus of judgment, and then seeing it's not just Yosef did something, but he actually did something in the space that means a shift in status, I think makes it all the more powerful. Does anyone have any thoughts or reactions? Yeah, Barry, go for it.
Okay. I don't mind waiting my turn if anybody else has a comment.
Does anyone else want to say anything?
Yes. This is
Leah, go for it. Nice to see you.
Hi. This is so interesting. I never thought of it this way. I'm thinking about how things would be given to the sons. And there's sort of this history in the Torah about sibling rivalry. And now the sibling rivalry is ending. He shares the honors among his siblings. That's a really powerful paradigm shift, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, also that Yosef feels empowered to do that, right? Because it sounds like it's not like Yaakov decided it's too much, but Yosef gets given this blessing. He says, actually, I need to share it with other people, and that he's allowed to do that. Not only is he allowed to do that, but that's actually what makes us into the nation that we are today. It's a really beautiful idea, and I think could translate into a lot of conceptions of chosenness that we have today as well, where it doesn't have to be something that necessarily sets us apart, but it can also be about how do we share with others and try and elevate others. I think that's a great way to be thinking about it. So thank you. Does anyone else want to share any ideas?
Go for it.
Barry, go for it. And if anyone else wants to share, feel free to raise your hand.
I have a different spin, Sophia, with all due respect. I'm thinking what surprised me was Yosef seems to have been his dreams in his youth, as imperfect as it was, and how he badmouthed his brothers to his father, and so he was punished in certain ways along the way for it. As Rashi's commentary is brilliant. Yosef gets to be the Bachor. That I see, because Yosef, his two sons, get to be two tribes. Yaakov Avinu annexes, he takes the boys, and the lads, and he makes them his own. And the rest of Yosef's afterborn children can be Yosef's, but those two guys are Yaakov's. So Ephraim and Manasseh, in reverse order of birth, but in order of priority as Yaakov blesses them, they get a tribe each. So Yosef gets a double portion, if you will, as the commentary goes, and therefore he's a bit of a Bechor. But Yosef, I think, is realizing not that he has to break tradition and share with his brothers, but that he has to recognize the promise and the covenant, because his mother's generation, Rachel, Leah, certainly the two handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah, went along, obviously, but those two women knew that as they were having sons, those sons were going to be the inheritors of Abraham's covenant and Yitzchak's covenant and their own father's covenant and Yaakov's covenant. So I think Yosef is carrying out the royal divine decree that those 12 sons were going to be the tribes of Israel, and yet it shook out a little bit differently, the way Levi got to be the gift to the Kohens to administer in the Holy Temple, etc. And so we get the count comes out good, and then when the Eretz Yisrael breaks, when the kingdom that was unified under David and under Shlomo breaks with Shlomo's son on the throne, Yoachav, that the dominion of Israel and the dominion of Yehuda, you would think there is rivalry, and in fact they have separate kings and whatnot. So I'm sure backing up now and seeing what comes later. If I back it up, I see that Yosef was really carrying out the divine decree, and he recognized that there was nobody once Yaakov died. That was it for Yaakov's generation. I don't know where the women were, but the women weren't part of this. Rachel was gone. I don't know when Leah passed away. I didn't see anything, and I have nothing about the mothers of Zilpah and Bilhah. But the men are gone, and Yosef is about to die. He's going to be the first of his brothers to die by name in Torah, and he tells the boys, "There's going to be a special covenant. There's going to be a special event. God is going to remember us, and He's going to take us out of Egypt. And you promise to take me with you," meaning take up his sarcophagus, take it with him, and they all go, obviously, by commentary and by further commentary along the way. They all go. So this is carrying out God's word back before Yosef even had an input to it. Yosef was a part of it, but he wasn't the maker of it.
I think even though it feels easy for us, I think, in retrospect, to say, "Oh, well, this makes sense. That of course is how it should have turned out. We want all of these brothers to be a part of the nation." I think that the brothers' initial reaction of fear suggests that it wasn't necessarily a given. And then also, what's so interesting about the Joseph story in particular is that up until then, God has been an active character in all of the forefathers' lives. And then God is weirdly absent in these last few chapters. Not that God isn't doing anything, but there's no narrative where it says, "And God made this famine happen, and God talked to Joseph." The only way that God shows up is talking to Jacob, but God doesn't talk to Yosef. If anything, we could say God talks to Joseph through dreams. Even that's not necessarily so clear. And so there already seems to be a stepping back of God. And Joseph talks about God being a part of his own life all the time. He thanks God for the ability to discern dreams, and he brings it up in the verses that we saw. Am I God that I can decide who's going to be chosen or not? But God disappears from the narrative, and so saying, "Oh, well, this is what God would have wanted," is a great question. How actually would Joseph have known that? There's a lot of amazing parallels to these stories in the book of Esther, which is also, God is totally absent from that narrative. Also, it's about different Jews in the royal court. That's a whole other interesting parallel. But I think that it's easy for us to say then, "Oh, that was divine decree. We see how things worked." But God did not play the same kind of present in their lives in the ways that the previous forefathers had it. I mean, Joseph isn't a forefather, right? Like we're even talking about the terminology, like the status in which Joseph gets is not the same as Abraham, Isaac, or Jacob. So I think that it is more questionable. And I think that there's something then especially courageous and special about Yosef acting in the way that he did, of wanting to share it with others. It's true, he does that. Ephraim and Manasseh get two portions, like that is true. But ultimately, like a lot of other tribes also get to really shine, as we were saying, which I think is very sweet.
I think there's a reason for it too, Sophia. I think there's a reason why God doesn't take the role. We've seen it before, earlier in Breshit, and we get it before our eyes with Moshe and Shmot. Can you think of what it is? Quiz time.
No. What do you say it again?
Moshe. Okay, I think God takes a passive role, doesn't communicate with us as much in a couple of occasions that we've seen earlier in Breshit, one of them early in Breshit, and later on we see it first in Shemot and then even later. And that is when either we are sinning or others around us are sinning and we are in the midst of that sinning. We're in the midst of that evil or that negative or whatnot. The first was Abraham and Lot. When Lot was in Abraham's presence, God did not communicate with Abraham. So goes the Rashi commentary. When Lot was away from Abraham's presence, then Abraham got communications. Later on, when Pharaoh and Moshe are negotiating, and Pharaoh is, trying to puff out his chest and tell Moshe about what to do, Moshe offers to pray to God, perhaps to alleviate one of the plagues. And Moshe says, I have to leave the city to pray to God. And Moshe has to leave the borders of the city to pray to God because the city is too wicked. The Egyptian cities are populated with the bad things we don't want to be influenced by, that God doesn't want us to be influenced by. So Moshe literally has to leave the city to make the prayer. And it's somewhere in Shemot. And so we see these things. And later on, during the 38 years after the spies, God isn't talking to Moshe either because of those events. So we are indicated why God takes a lower profile. So Yosef, he's the monarch, he's the viceroy of Egypt, but he's in Egypt basically operating. And God takes a low profile in those kind of neighborhoods. Yosef has to find a safe harbor to get communications, and he's surrounded in Egypt.
Well, then that makes it all the more so impressive then that Joseph's able to figure out what the divine will is. So that I think still works in with what we're saying.
Agreed. That's a good one.
Amazing. Does anyone else have any final thoughts? Otherwise, we'll wrap up.
Great Parsha. Yosef dies, though, right?
Yeah. Spoiler.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. All right. Well, thank you anyway. Hopefully this was interesting. I feel like I learned a lot about threshing floors in order to prepare for this, but it was exciting for me to think about this end of the Parsha in a totally different way and actually pay attention to it. For those of you that's the first time seeing this process of how we look at the Tanakh sources, then the Gemara sources, and try and synthesize. Hopefully it was exciting for you, a little bit different than maybe what you're used to. And we try and do it every week. So if you can, we'd love to see you next week also for Parshat Shemot, same link. And thank you so much. Thank you for all taking time on your Wednesday evening in order to learn some Torah.
Welcome back. Happy New Year. It's a great class. Thank you.
Thank you. Amazing.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good night. Bye.
Thank you.